Hello guys, welcome back to Global Supply Chain Management. In this session, we are going to talk about inventory types and demand management. Now, inventory or keeping inventory is one of the biggest issue in supply chains. And this is what we are going to talk about, what could be the strategies and what could be the tools and techniques to eliminate the inventory in a supply chain. But before that, let's look at what we have covered so far. So, in the beginning of these sessions, we have talked about the introduction, about supply chain and global supply chain. Then we have talked about Industry 4 and Industry 5.0 in supply chain management. Then time, cost, quality in supply chain management. After that, we have talked about supply chain management and marketing, resilience and risks in supply chain, bullwhip effect and risks in supply chain. We have also talked about creating a fast and ultra fast supply chains, lean in supply chain management, and now finally we are talking about inventory and demand management in supply chain. So this is the final session of this module, and I believe by this time you have a better understanding about the supply chains and how can you build a supply chain, what tools and techniques do you require, and what is actually the global supply chains. Now, so far we have understand that supply chains are based on our customer. That is a customer-centric supply chain. So the latest fashion in supply chains is all about customers, delivering the customer demand on time, at the right place, in the right quantity as well. So when we talk about in the right quantity, which means that we don't need to keep too much inventory. Why? Because we are moving towards more customization or mass customization and mass personalization. People like products which are personal to them. And that is how the trend is changing. The consumer behavior is changing. And because of that, we need to change our supply chain structure as well. So how can we do that? Now, very first, the model of flow of goods and type of inventory. We need to understand a bit about inventory, what inventory is. It's not just the finished product. It is all the components, the material, and everything we require to manufacture a product. So, for example, if you look at this model, which is something like input-output model, the input is raw material. The raw material we require to produce something, to manufacture something. The inventory of raw material is also an inventory. Now, when we talk about inventory, we need to keep that inventory in the warehouse. To keep that inventory in the warehouse, we need warehouses, and warehouses need space. More the inventory, more the space will be required. Now, when we talk about space, any warehouse or any place we are renting or we are buying to keep the inventory, that has a cost as well. So keeping more inventory need more space. More space is more rent, which is more expensive, more the cost of keeping the raw material. And we try to reduce the cost as much as we can. So what is happening? It is a traditional way to keep a lot of inventory. And you might have heard the terms like this: stockist or wholesalers. Those people, they used to keep inventory in-house. So whenever the demand is, they can supply the products or supply the raw materials or the component. So they used to keep the inventory in-house. But the drawback of having that too much inventory is that there is an additional cost to keep the inventory in the warehouse, but at the same time, the cost of having that inventory, managing the warehouse, the resources we are putting, that is an additional cost to that inventory as well. Now, the second type of inventory is work in process. So work in process could be the assembly line, where we are transforming that raw material into a finished product. So work in process is an assembly line or a manufacturing unit. Now, some of the inventory is in the warehouse. When we need inventory to manufacture something, the inventory in that process is also an inventory. So for example, we got 1,000 pieces of a component in the raw material inventory, and we got 100 products being manufactured. So means 100 components are within this work in process. It could be assembly line or it could be any manufacturing unit. So how much inventory do we have altogether? 1,000 plus 100, 1,100 components in our inventory. Now, the final inventory, when we keep a lot of finished goods and wait for demand, that demand will rise and we are going to sell it, so we keep that into inventory. That inventory is additional inventory. So far 1,100, and let's suppose we got 500 of the finished goods as well. So for the same component, we got 1,100, which is 1,100 plus 500 components in the finished goods. It becomes 1,600 inventory in the entire process. So we are keeping inventory here, we are keeping inventory here, we are keeping inventory here as well. That is a cost. We are keeping 1,000 pieces here, which is a cost to buy those components. 100 here, which is again the cost to buy 1,000 plus 100, 1,100. Now 500 here, which is sitting there, we are not selling it, we are just waiting for the demand. That is another additional cost. So inventory is not just the inventory of the finished goods. Inventory could be the raw material inventory and at the same time the material within the work in process. So we have to calculate the inventory in that way, and we need to try to minimize that inventory based on the demand. For example, if we only have demand for 500 items or 500 finished products here, we don't need to keep 500 in the inventory here. We don't need to keep 100 here, or we don't need to keep 1,100 here. So when we get demand for 500 finished goods, we can order the 500 components for or the raw material for that 500 products from our suppliers at the same time, and we just send those 500 to work in process. In that case, we don't need to keep the inventory here, we don't need to keep the inventory here, and we don't need to keep the inventory here, because as soon as we manufacture those 500, we will send it to the customer. That is the way the industries are working now, and this is the way to move forward, because keeping the inventory in-house at the stage of finished goods or the raw material, we never know when the trend is going to change. For example, fashion industry, the trend is changing very quickly. Sometimes it's overnight. So the finished goods might not sell tomorrow. And what will happen if it is not selling tomorrow? You might need to clear it, you might need to give it to charity, or you might need to dump it somewhere else. Same thing happened with the raw material. If the material is obsolete or is not being used anymore by any of the industry or any of the manufacturer, it is not required anymore, then what will happen? Let's suppose if any regulation change, if any legislation change, that this type of product or this specification of product, you can't use it anymore to make something, to manufacture something. So what will happen? You either had to clear it, or you have to dump it, or you have to recycle it. That is an additional cost. So that is where we are trying to minimize the inventory based on the demand and keeping the inventory to minimum, only which is required maybe for the buffer stock, maybe for a surge demand, or maybe for the emergencies. So we keep that inventory in stock. So we don't need to keep 1000 here. We might need to keep only 50. We might need to only keep 100 or 200. It all depends on our data of market trend, of the demand trend, and the sales trend. We can analyze how much inventory is required. So if you don't need to store 1000 and you now only need to store 200, you need a smaller warehouse, which is going to reduce the cost of keeping the inventory at the stage of keeping raw material. At the same time, if you are not keeping the inventory of the finished good, you don't need to store those finished goods. You don't need another warehouse to keep the finished goods as well, because you are only manufacturing based on the demand, and as soon as you manufacture, you ship it to your customer. That is where the trend is now. Let's move further and let's see what can we do to minimize the inventory and only keep inventory based on the demand. Now, so far, what we have seen three different type of inventory. One is raw material, which is iron, could be iron, wood, any supplier component. It could be any material based on type of manufacturing. The second one is work in process, which could be any inventory, any material which is used to manufacture something. And the third one is finished good. Now, the finished good, we are now moving towards make to stock or versus make to order. Now, the traditional way is make to stock, that we are manufacturing something to keep the stock of it. And that is what we have just discussed, that we don't need it anymore. We just focus on the demand, which is when we get the demand, we only make when we get an order from our supplier. We only manufacture when we get an order from our supplier, which is make to order. In that case, the supplies we store to support the functioning of the business. There is another type of inventory. When we have a business, when we have a manufacturing unit, or we are doing some kind of manufacturing, or we have an assembly line, we sometimes need other supplies as well. For example, let's say you are manufacturing mobile phones, but when you are manufacturing mobile phones, there is no need of having paper for manufacture mobile phone, but you need to print the documents. You need to support your manufacturing system through the admin process, HR process, and other processes. For that, you might need pens, you might need cleaning equipments, you might need cleaning stuff. You also might need pen, papers, and other stationery to provide training, to write the contracts, to send the documents to your suppliers, to send the contracts to your customers. So that is additional supplies which is required, and sometimes we need to keep the inventory of those as well. That is an additional type of inventory. Now there are two other different type of inventories as well. That is after the manufacturing, after we have manufactured something and keeping the inventory at the buyer's place. So whoever our customer is going to keep the inventory. Now there are two different types. One is consignment, which is housed by the buyer. Buyer keep the inventory, but the supplier still own the inventory. So for example, I'm a supplier and I'm supplying those notebooks to a buyer, and buyer is selling in their store. But if we have a contract with the buyer which is based on the consignment type of inventory, which means that we are going to keep the stock as a seller, we are going to keep the stock with the buyer, and whenever buyer sell the stock, they are going to pay for it. Until the stock is being sold, that is still my inventory. The buyer is not responsible for selling the item, or they might be responsible, but they are not liable until it sell the item. So that type of inventory, I'm not keeping that inventory in my warehouse. I'm keeping that inventory in the buyer's warehouse or the retailer's warehouse. They keep the inventory, and whenever it sell, they are going to pay me. The second type is vendor managed inventory. Now, vendor managed inventory is housed and owned by the buyer, but the inventory is managed by the supplier. So in that case, for example, in consignment, I was supplying the inventory to the buyer, and buyer only pays me whenever it sells. Now in vendor managed, I'm also managing the inventory at my buyer's place, so at the retailer. So when I'm supplying these notebooks, I'm also managing. For that, I need to keep track of each and every sale of these notebooks at my retailer. So when retailer sell 10, I need to supply another 10. So that track I need to keep how many I'm selling, how many notebooks are being sold by the supplier. That is vendor managed. Now it is possible that you have a contract with your buyer that it is consignment based, but it is vendor managed as well. That you are going to send the product, whenever it sells, you are going to replenish the inventory, but at the same time, whenever it sells, then only you will get paid. So there are two ways to do that. Now, some of the stores, they use consignment, some of the stores, they use vendor managed, and some of the stores can do a hybrid, could be both. Let's look at what could be done based on the demand. Which one is the better option? There is no set criteria which one is the better option, but let's see, based on the demand, which could be the better option for you as a seller or for you as a buyer. Now, the other two type of demand is dependent demand and independent demand. I will try to explain that with an example. So for example, a car manufacturer got an order to manufacture 10 cars. Now each car will require 4 tires. So they will require 40 tires to manufacture 10 cars. Now the tire demand depends on the orders of the car. So when somebody put order to car manufacturer, then the car manufacturer will require tires to manufacture that car. So in that case, the tire demand is dependent on the demand of the cars. If there is no demand of the cars, there will be no demands of the tires as well. In the second way, the independent demand, the demand of tires is not just relying or dependent on the car manufacturing. The tire manufacturer sell the tires to the workshops as well. For example, in case of emergency, when the tire is flat or tire is busted, then in that case, people will need just one tire, and that is an independent demand. That has a pattern. The pattern is being affected by the emergencies, accidents, or the season. For example, there is more demand of tires in winters than the summers. I'm just giving an example. Why? Because in winters, the rear tire is too much because of the weather condition, because of the snow, because of the ice on the road. And in summers, the rear tire is less. So the independent demand of the tires is more in the winter period. Same thing could happen with the dependent demand as well. the people are buying cars during the June and July, or maybe let's say during the Christmas. During the Christmas period, people are buying more cars. So demand of car increase during the Christmas period. So do the dependent demand of the tires will increase during the Christmas period as well. These both the demands we need to forecast by looking at the pattern, by looking at the data, what happened in the previous year. So we need to forecast the requirement of the final product, and we need to decide on the independent or the independent demand. And based on the dependent and independent demand, our inventory decision will be based on those two types of demand as well. Now, so far, what we have learned that there are different types of inventory, and inventory relies on demand. So, the primary function of the inventory is keeping the buffer inventory for the uncertainty, for any surge in demand, and the decouple dependencies of the inventory in the supply chains. Now, decoupled dependencies we are going to talk about in the next video. But let's keep that in buffer. We are going to talk about buffer as well, but buffer inventory is one where we keep the buffer inventory a certain percentage, which we have already talked about, a certain percentage at each stage of the manufacturing process. Now, the four main categories of demand of inventory so far. The first one is raw material. The second one is work in process, which is the manufacturing unit, or anything we are, maybe the assembly line, anything we are manufacturing in the assembly line, and then the finished goods, the finished products, and also the products we need for maintenance, repair, or for operations. For example, paper, pens, and any other material or inventory we require to perform the entire operations of the manufacturing. So those four different type of inventories we need. Now, in the next one, we are going to look into in bit more details. All those four type of inventories, they are different type of cost as well. So as an example, direct cost. Direct cost is which is directly traceable to the unit produced. So the cost of labor for each unit we are going to produce, that will be the cost of labor. That is the direct cost. For each car we are going to manufacture, the cost of 4 tires, that will be the direct cost as well. Indirect cost, which cannot be traced directly to what we are producing, because that might change, that could have variation, because sometimes we need specific type of products for a car manufacturing. Sometimes based on the customer requirement, we might need to customize the car for the customer, and you might need a specific different type of color to manufacture the car, specific different type of component to manufacture the car. That could be the indirect cost, but again, that is dependable on the demand. Fixed cost, that is independent to the output quantity. For example, the buildings, equipments, anything we are using to support the operations to manufacture something, that has fixed cost. For example, the car manufacturing unit, you have to pay the rents, or you have to maintain the premises as well, and that could has the fixed cost. Variable cost, with the cost which varies season to season, from summer to winter. Winter has different cost, in summer it might have different cost as well. It could be based on the material as well, based on the fluctuation in exchange rate. If you are buying something from any other country, based on the exchange rate, the price of that component or that material changes as well. Another one is order cost, which has the direct variable cost for placing an order. When you are placing an order for the components you need to manufacture a car, it has a cost. It has an admin cost. It has a cost of the time taken to produce to produce that order. Now, more the number of orders, more the cost will be. For example, you are getting order to manufacture bicycles every day. And as soon as you get the order, you order the tire and other components for the bicycle. So what happened? Let's suppose in the morning you got 5 for 5 bicycles. Then in the morning, as soon as you get the order, you order 10 tires. Now, that pattern has changes over the day. Morning 5, then afternoon 10, then evening 10, and then late night another 10. 5, 10, 10, 10. And that is how in the same pattern you are creating the order for the tires and the other components. In the morning you're raising a purchase order for 10 tires. In the afternoon, evening and the night you are raising the purchase order for 20 tires to fulfill the demand. Now in that case you are raising 4 purchase orders in a day. Now the cost of raising that purchase order will be the 4 times. Now to reduce that, can we make one purchase order, or can we raise one purchase order every day? So the cost of the raising purchase order will be just one time. Now that is a decision. It always has trade-off based on so many other different criteria. How many times you should be ordering in a day? That is a different story, and we are going to talk about it later on. Now, order cost, holding or carrying cost, how much inventory you can hold. Now the ordering cost is also directly related to holding and carrying cost as well. How much tires you can hold at any point of time in your warehouse. Do you have capacity to hold 20 tires, or do you have capacity to hold 100 tires? So in the whole day, based on our example, 40 tires, 40 tires, 40 tires, and then 10 tires. So whatever number of tires, can you hold those number of tires in your warehouse at any point of time? If you order all those tires with one purchase order, they will deliver at the same time. Can you hold it in your warehouse? So holding and carrying cost, what will be the cost of that? When they deliver in chunks, let's say 25 tires or 30 tires at one time for 15 bicycles. 15, 15, 15, 15. So 4 time deliveries, you need to put more resources for delivery as well. To receive deliveries, somebody need to take it out, somebody need to put it in the warehouse, somebody need to count it as well. So you are putting more resources on that. But if it comes once in a day only, that same resources can count tires for 100 bicycles in one go. So we have to think about that as well. Some of the things, some of the variables when we are ordering the inventory. So another type of cost is in manufacturing or setup cost. So that cost could be when you are manufacturing one type of bicycle, let's say 10 bicycles of one type, and then you got order of another 10 bicycles of a different type bicycle, and then you got order for another different type of bicycle. So you are let's say the first one is for men's bikes, the second one is for kids bike, and the third one is for, let's say, mountain bike. Okay, so mountain bike, kids bike, and let's say road bike. So 3 different type of bike. So every time you switch from one type of assembly to another type of assembly, your setup cost and the manufacture cost will occur. When you change the machines, when you set up the machines to manufacture a different type of bike, or when you change the assembly line to manufacture a different type of bike. So that is an additional cost as well. Now, in the next one, we look into a bit more details with examples so we can understand a bit more about the inventory and the demand management. So how can we align those together to make sure that we keep the minimum inventory or no inventory, and at the same time we can minimize the cost of the inventory as well.